So something that comes up a lot in the state change community is the issue of trying to figure out what your events recently have been, knowing about what function calls there might have been, or what endpoints might have been called specifically, but really like what turns in the logic have happened. And this can happen for a couple different reasons. One reason is that you might be inside a function stack. Function stack is just way too long, right? To have, and you lose things when you're looking at them through the debugger. And the other, and can be trying to understand how the software actually gets used and when certain things inside the endpoints are actually occurring. Put a different way, we want to keep track of events. So Xano provides us with a couple ways of tracking the use of our system. One is you can just take a look at the recent requests and see what was going on with that. And we can take a look at the request, particularly in the course of the last 24 hours by clicking on the request history when we're sitting here in the top level of the workspace. And that can be really useful to get a flavor for it, particularly very, very early on. There's also the metadata API, which lets you download those kinds of requests to wherever you want them to go, so you can be keeping track of that over a longer period. And of course, put that into a database or, Airtable sheet or whatever for slicing and dicing as is going to be most helpful to you. Now, what I have found is that the most interesting questions are going to be about like specific turns of logic. What are we doing and when are we doing some of those things? This can be important for like performance tuning to find out when certain activities have occurred. And this can also be important for, the certain expensive services that we might be calling on a frequent basis. Things that might be tied to functions as opposed to being directly tied to API requests, things that might be triggered out of our background tasks. These are all examples of things that are useful for us to know about. It can be very important for us to tune our applications, but the Xano doesn't really support out of the box. So how do we make it that we can get access to this information and do it in a way that's relatively easy? We can do it with an event log. And this is something we talk about kind of frequently over on State Change office hours. So I'm giving you some inside dope here as to a technique that we've used more than once. So we can say we want to have a log, and we'll just do it as a table for a second, and we'll call it event log. We don't want any endpoints for it because this is going to be a private log that's going to be useful inside the appliance. We can later have, either endpoints or functions or whatever for doing analysis on it. But the important thing here is this is a safe place to be dumping the information. We'll just say add table here. Once this table exists, I find there are a few fields you want to put in. You don't want too many fields. It makes it too complicated. So I'm going to put in a text field, which is going to be source, usually indicating what function is adding information to the event log or endpoint or whatever it is. I'm going to have another one. I'm going to call it message, which is, plain text way of describing what's happening, why are we putting something into the log. And then just to keep things simple, I like to use the JSON data type to have freeform data so that, whatever information you want to put in. So one useful way of doing this is to have an event log that's going to become when you get data coming back from, like OpenAI or something, right? Something that's a relatively expensive call. You want to make sure that you can go back and find out, well, what were we working with and why didn't this thing work properly? Well, you can just take all that data from that request and dump it into the data field because data, being a type of JSON, is really Xano's equivalent of anything can go in there, which is super convenient. So now I've got my event log nice and flexible, not that much to it. And the next thing I want to do is, you could apply it directly by putting in add record calls, but I like to have a little bit more control over that and abstract it. And so I use library and I create a function, and I'll say function. And, thing in Xano is that the function names aren't actually the names that are used in the code. So we can name them something useful. Add event to log. Cool. And then I'll just set up the inputs to be kind of like what we talked about before. Source and message and data. And then I can just say, okay, we're going to make a database request that will add a record to my events table, event log. There it is. And it's actually sort of filtered in now, so it's kind of smart about that. And now I'm going to know when things happened. And then I can publish. Actually, before I publish that, I actually find these events these kinds of functions are most useful when they have no response that came out. So I just say, no response, please. right? That would just NA itself and it'll never have data coming out. That way you can drop it into any of your endpoints and it just works. So let's publish that for a second. Cool. And now let's make another function to test it. And we're going to call it, test log. And we're going to do something where we're going to use it for a little bit of performance, right? And we're going to create we're going to do a custom function and say add event to log. And we're going to call it, the source will be test log and the message will be starting, right? No particular data to it. Save. And then, I could do something like, utility and just tell it to, let's just try sleeping for 5 seconds, right? 5 seconds, save. And then I want to add the event to the log again. And I will say database requests and add record. No, I don't want to do that. The whole point was to do it through a custom function, right? So do add event to log. And I will say this is going to be, object. And I'm just going to set, call this duration 5 based on 5,000 milliseconds that we think went along with the map. And really, you can put whatever information you want to in here. And I'm going to say, save that. And I will say, let's just run it and run it. Five seconds. Good. See, nothing goes back. It's interesting. And if I want to, I can go back over to database, take a look at my event log, and I'll see that I have both my starting and the fact that I woke up for the nap. And if I take a look at the data when I woke up for the nap by double clicking on it, I can see it has a duration of 5,000. The other thing you can do by having abstracted it into a function like this is you can decide maybe later on that you don't think there's enough performance in putting it into a local database. Maybe you want it to go off-site. Maybe you want to use Datadog or one of these other logging systems. Totally fine. See, now you don't have to change the way the rest of your code works because you've abstracted that concern through the function. And now I can go back down here to say add event to log. And maybe instead of doing the add record, you're going to be doing, an external API request over to Datadog or whoever it is you're going to have as your logging service, CloudWatch, whatever it might be. This gives you more options because you've abstracted the concern. And it also just allows you very easily to start at no marginal cost to you, because this works even on the free plan in Xano, to start having these kinds of events get tracked. And when you do, you're going to be able to start walking through that, stepping one at a time, and you'll be able to see things that you couldn't see before. Like, when Xano when you have a function stack that, goes through more than 10,000 steps. So let's run up a score for a second. So we're just going to say we're not going to worry about the Datadog thing. Let's talk about one of the places where this becomes really useful. And that's going to be if I have a good event to log, and I'm going to, actually, make sure it's not in draft mode. Publish. Cool. And now let's talk how to test the event log. Test event log. Here it is. And we will say event log. How about I'm going to, right now, if I were to run this with a debugger, it should be kind of trivial, right? It would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the debugger is totally fine with it, right? It's just going to show me all the results. But what if I instead had something like, data manipulation, for, and we'll just say, 10,000 steps, save, and I'm just going to, establish a new variable, data manipulation, create variable, var1 with value 0, save, and then I'm just going to say for each of those, we're going to do data manipulation math, add to var1, we're just going to add 1, right? That way, each time it just gets kicked out by 1. We're not going to sleep, and we're going to just have return var1. That way, it'll return 10,000 at the end. Great. I can run that. You'll see it comes back with 10,000. You see it has 1,000 plus statements. It doesn't tell us how it worked, right? So it'll tell us about the first N of those, roughly the first 1,000 of those times it was adding the number. It won't tell us about any of the things that happen after those first 10,000. One of the cool things about the add event to log is it makes sure that we're able to put them in. So what if I just said here, let's just say add, and I'm going to do a, custom function. I'm going to do add event to log, and custom function, add event log, and the source is going to be test event log, adding, and here I'm just going to say this is, once again going to be total, and the value is just going to be whatever the current value is. All right. That way it'll keep on going up and up and up. So we'll say save, save, save. Great, let's rerun this. Now this will take a little bit longer because whenever you're writing things to the database, Xano waits for the journaling to occur. And that means you're going to be slowed down by each of these queries that are going on in. Great, here we go. So now I have the 10,000 here, right? If I were to go back over to the database, I would see in my event log, sure, I started, woke up. Oh wait, and now it's adding. You see, each time it adds, it knows how much that total was. And it actually keeps all 10,000 of those are now in the event log in a way they couldn't have been the debugger. So this becomes a way that you can be using the event log for both tracking things in production to see how people are actually using your system, and also be even tracking things when you're just doing development and you're in something that's complicated enough that the Xano built-in debugger isn't giving you enough of a view of what's going on. And this can also be really helpful when you sort of have multi-part systems. You're trying to figure out, okay, what's happening when, and the combination of using created out of the log, as well as the messages of what's thinking about as it goes, can become super, super helpful. And of course, then you can use functions or use endpoints or whatever to do more slicing of this information as you see fit. And this is all, of course, before you ever bring it over to one of those actual data retrieval services. So that's the skinny on how to use a nice, simple event log to be able to get better understanding of your system in very, very short amount of time. I hope you find it helpful. And if you have enjoyed this, please, like and subscribe. But more importantly, tell me what other topics you'd find helpful, because we're always trying to focus on the hardest 5% over at State Change.